Hello folks, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a platformer in Godot. We will add a player with different animations, enemies to avoid, and apples to collect. We'll create different levels for the game and add some more advanced features like moving platforms. All the code and assets are linked in the video description, and there's a link to my Discord server too. So let's get right into it. If this is your first time using Godot, then the editor might feel a bit overwhelming. We will begin by creating our player. In Godot, everything is made up from nodes. By default, it gives us a few options here, a 2D scene, a 3D scene, or a user interface. But the button underneath gives me access to all of the nodes inside Godot. This node panel looks a little bit scary at first, but it's going to make a lot more sense as we progress. So the first thing to do is create the player, and that will be a 2D object. So we look for it inside the node 2D section. It's a collision object and it's a physics object. And down here is character body 2D. That is the node that we're going to use for our player. So the first thing I'll do is just rename this node to player. For my game, I'm going to be using sprites from the Pixel Adventure sprite sheet, which you can download over on itch.io. It includes various characters, but the one that I want to use for my main player is this pink one. So I need to be able to access these images from Godot. That brings us onto the file system in the bottom left. This is my root folder, so inside I'm going to create another folder which I will call assets. In there I'll make another folder called images, and finally inside that folder I will create another one called player. Inside the asset pack, this character is actually called Pinkman, so that's where you can find all these different sprite sheets. It includes quite a few different ones, but I need idle, jump, hit, and run. So I grab these four and I drag them over to my player. Now that I have these images, I can assign them onto my player character. So I add a child node here and I search for animated sprite 2D. The reason I use that node is because all of these sprite sheets are animations, and this node will automatically handle those animations for me. To configure this, I head over here and I create new sprite frames. Then I click on it again to bring up this menu at the bottom. And this is where I can define all of those animations. So first, I'm going to rename default to idle. This is going to be the standard animation when nothing else is happening. I need to use this idle sprite sheet here. And to do that, I need to click this button here, which says add frames from sprite sheet. Now I can navigate to that folder and select my idle sprite sheet. And if I zoom in, you can see all of those individual frames. Now the objective of all these panels over here is to make it so that each individual image is inside one box. And I do that by playing around with these numbers here. Horizontal means how many tiles I have horizontally. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I've got 11 individual frames and I have only one going vertically. So now each frame is inside of its own box. I now click and drag across all of them to select them in that order, add them to my animation. And now if I zoom in, you can actually see a tiny little player. The player is very small though, compared to my overall game window. So I'm going to size him up by selecting the player node, heading over to transform and changing the scale up to 3. That makes the player a lot bigger, but notice how blurry it is. This is just a result of how these images are processed. So I head back over to my animated sprite 2D node and go to texture, filter, and change this from inherit onto nearest. And now it immediately sharpens up the image. So let's test out the animation. If I click play, you can see it going through all of those frames. But it's really slow. According to the creator, these animations have a speed of 20 frames per second. Whereas by default, Godot has set this to 5 frames. So I just need to change this number to 20. And now the animation is a lot faster. We can now add more animations here. The next one I want to do is the jump animation. And that one's actually just a single frame. So this time I don't need to call it from a sprite sheet. I can just drag it across. The frame rate doesn't really matter because there is no animation here. It's a single frame, but I'm going to set it to 20 just to keep it consistent and avoid any issues later on. Now that I've done these two animations, I still have hit and run. The process for those is the same as the idle animation. So this is a challenge for you guys. Pause the video and see if you can set them up yourself. And in the meantime, I'll continue and set them up as well. So the next one is going to be the run animation. I will set that to 20 frames per second and I will load in my sprite sheet. This is the one that I need. I count up the number of individual frames, which looks like 12 horizontally and 1 vertically, and then click and drag across from left to right. So let's test that out, and that gives me a nice smooth running animation. And lastly, we create the hit animation. Same process as before, 20 frames per second, and we load in the hit sprite sheet. This one only has 7 horizontal frames and 1 vertical one. Click and drag across, and now I have my hit animation as well. So at this point, you should have the same animation set up as me. Now let's actually test this out. Notice that this scene is unsaved. We need to save this scene, but before I save it, I need to create a folder for it to go into. So back into my root folder, I create a new folder called Scenes. If I collapse the assets folder, we can now see the two side by side. So now I can save this one inside the scenes folder and just use the default name of player. I can now run this scene by clicking this button over here or just pressing F6 on the keyboard. And now we have this little guy appearing in the top left. So there's two obvious problems. The first is that it's kind of in the wrong place. And the second is that there's no animation. So let's deal with the first problem first. The player isn't actually in the wrong place. Relative to its own scene, it is in the correct place. It's at coordinates 0, 0 in the top left corner. The problem is that I haven't created a 2D world for the player to exist in. And that's what I'm going to do next. I'll create a new scene with this plus button here. And this time I don't need to go looking for other nodes. I just select the 2D scene node. This will add a node 2D, which I'll rename to main. This will be my main game where I will have all of my other nodes inside of. Before I proceed, I'm going to save this one inside of the scenes folder, but now I can add the player into this node. I do that by right-clicking, and instead of adding a child node, I instantiate a child scene. This is the list of scenes that I've got available, and I select the player. So now you notice that the player has been brought across, and is now a child of my main scene. I can click and move the player wherever I want on the screen. So right now he's kind of in the middle, but if I head back over to the player scene, it's still in the top left. This is correct, and this is how it should be. Inside my main scene is where I position all of the objects, and I basically set up the game. So now I can test my whole project by clicking this button or pressing F5 on the keyboard. The first time I run it, it's going to say that no main scene has been defined, but I have now created my main scene. So I just select current. And now it loads the character in the same position that I have it on the screen here. The second problem persists, which is that there is no animation. The player is just stuck on a single frame. Well, that's easy to fix. We head back over to animated sprite, select the idle animation, and then click this button here, which says autoplay on load. That little icon will appear next to it, and it means that now when I head back over to my main scene, press F5 again, it will start by running that animation by default. Now we need to add some controls to the player, and this is where we get into a little bit of code. We select the player node and click this button here to create a new script. By default, this will want to put it in the same folder as my scene, but I want a separate folder for all my scripts. So I head into this button here, go up into my main root folder, which has my assets and scenes, and I click this button to create a new folder called scripts. Now I can use this folder to save my new script. This will automatically pre-populate quite a lot of code for us. And the reason it does that is because this node is of a particular type. If I hover over it, we've renamed it to player, but originally this was a character body 2D node. So the first line of the code here says extends character body 2D. It means that it already has some built-in functionality. Godot knows that if you're making a player character, there's a certain features that you expect to have. It then predefines a few variables for us, which we can change. So this is the speed the player will move at, and then the jump velocity, how hard the player jumps up. After that, there's a function that handles all of the physics. This is pretty handy. It means that I don't have to worry about the gravity and the controls myself. It's actually already there. We just need to modify it. This first section here adds that gravity. It first of all checks whether the player is on the ground. This is done with is on floor, which is an inbuilt function in Godot, so we don't have to define it. If the player is not on the floor, that means it's in the air. And in that case, gravity is applied to its velocity. So it's dragged down. The next bit that's pre-populated is jumping. Godot gets an input from the keyboard, and if the input that's just been pressed is UI accept, which is the spacebar, and the player is on the ground, i.e. not currently falling, then we jump. And lastly, we get some inputs to move left and right. So first of all, it gets the player direction by either pressing the left or the right arrow keys. Based on that direction, the player's X velocity is changed. And lastly, all of this is wrapped up inside move and slide. This handles all of that physics behind the scenes, so we don't have to worry about collisions and movement. Godot does all of that for us. So now I can test this out by pressing F5, and you notice the player appears for a second and then drops down because of gravity. So that's good. That means it's all working, but we need somewhere for the player to stand, otherwise he's just going to fall off the screen. I head back over to my main scene, and here I'm just going to temporarily create a little platform. So I right click on my main scene and add a child node. What I'm looking for here is just going to be a basic collision object. I don't need another character, I just need something static. So I'm going to use static body 2D. I will add an image to it so that I can actually see it. So that will be done with a sprite 2D node. Remember, for the player, we used animated sprite because it had animations, but Sprite 2D is the basic version of that, which is just a static image. Because this is just a temporary platform, I'm going to use this icon image here from Godot. So I drag it over into the texture, and you can see it appearing up here. So I'm going to drag this platform over here. However, I have to be careful when I do that, because when I click and drag, I'm actually dragging the sprite, not the whole thing. You can see that that stayed behind where it was. So I'm going to undo that, keep it where it is, and instead select my static body 2D and click this group button. So now, whenever I move this around, I'm moving the whole thing, not just the image. Now let's put this platform underneath the player and rerun the game to see what happens. This time the player still falls through. And the reason for that is because there is no collision between these two objects. They're just images. You'll notice that there's warning signs next to my nodes. And if I hover over them, they say pretty much the same thing. The node has no shape, so it can't collide or interact with other objects. I need to add a collision shape to both of these nodes. So I add a child node here, and I select collision shape 2D. I head over to configure it on the right hand side, and I select the type of collision shape I need, which in my case is just a rectangle. And if I zoom in a little bit here, I can resize this collision shape to roughly match the size of my platform. So that's done two things. First, it's given a collision shape to my object, and it's also gotten rid of that warning sign. The player still has a warning sign, so we head back over to the player scene, zoom in a little bit, and then create a collision shape here as well. So I head over, and I can use different types of collisions depending on how accurate I want this to be. For this game, I think a rectangle is going to be more than enough. So I just drag it around to make sure that I hit the feet so that it doesn't clip through the floor, and then just roughly get the overall outline of the sprite. So I just need to reduce the top a little bit to cover the ears. And even though there are some areas that are outside of the sprite, I think in general this is good enough. But if you wanted to have really accurate collision, there's loads of other options here that allow for more precise collision to be defined. The thing to keep in mind though is the more detailed the collision shape, the more complicated the calculations become. So now I can save this, head back over to my main game, run the game again, and this time the player stands on top of the platform. I can move left and right, and if I go off the edge, it will fall down and disappear off the screen again. If for whatever reason your collision didn't work there is sometimes a little bug with Godot. So because we grouped all of these objects previously, you can ungroup them and rerun your code. That may fix the problem. But now we've got some basic collision on the player. We can move left and right, press spacebar to jump, and gravity brings the player back down. But there are still a few things here that need to be fixed. The first thing that I want to do is change the controls. So I head over to project settings, and select the input map. Here I can add additional actions. So let's add an action for going left, and I will configure this to use the A key. So if I just press A, it will pick it up automatically. And I will add a second condition, which is going to be the left arrow key. So that takes care of the left. Now I'm going to do right and jump. And if you like, you can pause it here and try and set them up yourself. In the meantime, I will configure right and jump. Right is going to be very similar to left. I'm going to set up with D, and I will also add the right arrow key. And then for jump, I will use the spacebar or the W key. The names that I've given these actions here are important. So left, right, and jump. I now have to actually go and use them inside of my script. If I switch over to the script view and go to where my controls are handled, the jump here is done by using UI accept. This is a default mapping within Godot that just happens to be the spacebar, but it's not what we want to use here. Instead, I'm going to change this to jump. I can then do the same thing for my directions, left and right. So I just remove the UI, leaving left and right. You notice Godot actually tells you to do that anyway. In this comment here, as good practice, you should replace UI actions with custom gameplay actions. And that's what we've just done, so I can remove that comment. I can rerun the game now, and I can use A and D to move around and press W to jump. The same works with spacebar and left and right. We can also adjust the physics of the game. Right now, I feel like the jumping is a little bit floaty, so I'm going to change the gravity settings. Gravity is something that's built into Godot, so I head over to project settings again, over to general, and I can just search for gravity. This filters down to physics, go into 2D, and by default, it's 980, but I'm going to change that to 2500. So I'm going to increase gravity quite a lot. If I rerun this code, the player's jumps turn into these little hops. Gravity is much stronger, and the player's jumps are a lot smaller now. So I'm going to compensate for that and increase the jump velocity, which I would change to minus 850. The reason it's negative is because the Y coordinate starts at the top and moves down the screen. If I rerun this, the player will jump much higher than before, but because the gravity is increased, they get pulled down to the ground a lot quicker as well. And I think for my platformer, this is more the kind of physics that I want. But you can play around with these numbers and tailor them to how you want the physics to feel. The next thing we need to address is the animation. Right now, the player is just constantly stuck inside of the idle animation. So let's start with the running animation. Inside of my physics process function, I'm going to add a little comment at the top, which will say add animation. And for the running animation, I just need to check the player's x velocity. So I'll say if velocity.x is greater than 1, meaning that the player is moving to the right, or velocity.x is less than -1, meaning that they're moving to the left. Well, if either of these are true, then that means the player is running. He's not stationary, in which case I want to change my image. So let me just head over to my player scene here. We have the player, which is what the script is attached to. And underneath that, I have different nodes, including my animated sprite. The sprite is the thing that contains the images. So for me to change the animation, I need to access this node. And there's an easy way to do that. I can just click and drag it into my existing script, hold Control, and then let go. What this will do is automatically populate some code that loads in my animated sprite 2D node, and it assigns it to this variable. So now I can just call this variable whenever I want to do anything to this node. So let's copy that and come back down to this function here. So if my player is moving, then I want to take that animated sprite 2D node, and I want to change the animation property into running. And as I've typed this, I've noticed a problem. So have a think and see if you can spot what the issue is going to be. I'm going to run the game and I'm going to try and move. As soon as I do that, the player disappears. And I get an error down here. The error says that running doesn't exist. If I switch over to my animated sprite 2D again and go into the sprite frames, my animation names aren't matching this. So I actually need to rename this, and I'm going to change this to running, jumping, idle, and dying. Although the original sprite sheet was called hit, I'm actually going to be using this animation for when the player is dead. So we change that to dying. If I now rerun this time the animation actually changes. So the sprite goes into this running mode, but when I release the keyboard, it stays in that running mode. So we need an else statement here, meaning that if the player is not moving, then animated sprite 2D dot animation is set to idle. Retest this, run around, and now it switches back and forth between the two animation states. Now we can take care of the jumping animation. So let me copy this to save typing it all out again. And the jumping one is going to be quite easy. It's just whenever the player is in the air, and that's defined by this line here, because the player is not on the floor. They're not on the floor, that means they're in the air. So we can change this to be jumping. And we run this again just to test, and there we go. So the player now switches between the three animation states. But annoyingly, the player doesn't change direction. So when he goes to the right, it's fine. But when he goes to the left, he kind of just moonwalks across instead. I actually want the player to flip so that it faces in the direction that it's moving. And that's actually quite easy to do. If I flip over to the 2D view again and select my animated sprite, there is an option here under offset for flip horizontal and flip vertical. So if I tick this, the sprite just flips left to right. And I can control this variable in the code. So depending on which direction the player is moving on, I can just turn this on or turn this off. If I head back to the script and go down to the bottom, just after I do my move and slide and basically all of the physics are finished, I can then take care of this animation direction. I will do that based on the direction the player is facing. So I can say if direction is equal to 1, which means that the player is moving to the right, then my animated sprite 2D node, which I'll just copy from up here, dot flip underscore h property, which is this checkbox here, that should be set to false. And then let's just copy this code down and say otherwise, which is elif direction is equal to -1, then we set that variable to true. And if I run this code again, I should now be able to run left and right, and the player stays looking in the direction that it last ran in. This applies to my other animations too, so I can jump and flip in midair left and right, depending on which buttons I'm pressing. Now the player is almost done. There's one little thing I would like to add though, which is a sound effect every time I jump. I go back into my assets folder and I will create a new folder inside of it, which I will call sounds. And if I open that out, I've got my images, and next to that is my sounds folder. I got a bunch of open source sound effects and even background music, which will be linked in the description. So I'm going to select all of those and just drag them in right now. Even though for now I only need the jump sound effect, I've also pulled in the other ones I'm going to use, like the death sound effect, then the noise whenever the player collects an apple, and a background music. So we'll get to all of those later, but for now I'm just going to do the jump sound effect. To add in a sound effect, it's just like anything else in Godot. You add a node. The parent is the player, so I go into here, right click and add a child node to it. And pretty much everything I'm going to need for this game is inside this Node 2D node. The node I need now is Audio Stream Player 2D. So I'm going to rename that to Jump Sound. And then to assign my jump sound effect, I just drag it over to the stream. But the sound effect isn't going to play automatically. So I need to do the same thing that I did with the animated sprite. I need to drag it over, hold Control, and release the mouse. This way I can now access my jump sound inside of my code. And what we'll do is head into where I jump, which is this section here. As soon as I press the spacebar or press the W key, first of all, the player's velocity is going to be updated. But then I will call my jump sound and then just say .play. So let's test this out. Yeah, so everything's working well. So for now, we're pretty much done with the player. There will be a couple of things we need to come back later on, but we can move on and build the rest of the game. And I'm going to start by creating the level. I'll create a new scene, and like the others, I'm going to start off with a 2D root node, but I'll rename this to be my level root. The level is going to be made up of individual tiles. The asset pack that I'm using for this game contains various different designs for the tile set. So I need to load this image into Godot, and then I need to configure the individual tiles for that set. So let's first of all load it in. If I create a new folder under images, which I will call Tilemap, and I will then drag over that tile set into it. Then I will add a child node here, which is the tile map layer. The tile map needs a tile set. So over here, I need to create a new tile set, and you can see the display has changed. It's now turned into a little grid of squares, which are going to be my individual tiles. But before I can draw anything, I head over to my tile set where I need to add a new tile source. So we select Atlas and then navigate to the assets folder, images, tile map, and the terrain. Clicking yes on this box will automatically scan the tile set and it will identify each individual square. So it saves a lot of work for us doing it that way. Now that I have my tile set split up into these individual squares, I can switch over to the tile map and start actually drawing my level. I would do this by just selecting any of these tiles that I want to use, and then let me just get rid of this and zoom in on my game map a little bit. And you notice that everything is split up into this grid. So I just click and drag to draw wherever I want these tiles to go. I can use the line tool to give me finer control. There's also the rectangle fill tool for larger areas as well, and the paint bucket to fill in any gaps. Finally, if I right click, then I simply delete whatever's there. But notice as I draw this that actually these tiles are really small compared to my overall game window. It might be hard to make it out, but the game window is this purple line here. So this big blue rectangle is what I'm going to see inside of my game. And these tiles are far too small. We had the same issue with the player, so we increased the scale. And that's what I'm going to do here as well. I head over into transform and change the scale from 1 to 3. Now the tiles are much bigger and they will suit the level a lot better. Now if I zoom out, I can see that it's much easier to fill the overall game window using these tiles. And this is pretty much how I'm going to create this level, by just drawing out all the tiles that I want to have. But speaking of the game window, I haven't actually defined the size of it. If I head over to my project settings and search for window, the first setting here allows me to change the resolution. So my width and height by default are set to 1152 and 648, but I'm going to set it to a more standard resolution of 1280 by 720. So once I've applied that, it's going to automatically resize this blue rectangle. Now that I've shown you how to use these tools, go ahead and pause the video and try and create your own level. Play around with the different drawing tools and see what you can come up with. In the meantime, I'm going to draw my own level if you want to follow along with it. I tend to use the line tool quite a lot, and I'm going to start off by just creating an outline for the entire window. The main reason for this is so that the player can't fall off the edge of the map. So I create this overall outline, and this will be the boundary for the entire level. I'll have the player starting somewhere over here, so I'm just going to create this little area for him to stand on, and you can also select multiple tiles at once. So if I just click and hold all 3 of these, I can actually put them all in one point. I'm just going to tweak this end bit, and then I will add another one somewhere over here, just a little platform. I'm actually going to move this down a little bit, it's too high up, and then I'll do a little platform up here in the top right, which I can extend for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares, and then a smaller one. Let's do a smaller one here, like so. And then I want to use these little blocks here as well. One there, and one there. Okay, let's see how this looks. So first I need to save this. I'm going to go into my scenes and create a new folder here called levels, just so I can keep them organized. And I'll rename this to level 1. Then I head over into my main script. Now here, I don't actually have that level loaded in. So I need to instantiate it. I right click, select instantiate child scene, and I call through level 1. And there's my level. I can now delete this static body 2D that I had here temporarily. That was just for testing. So we've got the player, but the player actually needs to be part of my level. It's not supposed to be part of the main node. What we're going to do here is go back into the level and instantiate the player as a child of this scene. Now I've got the player in the top left, we move him somewhere around here. So this will be the start point. If I now head back over to my main script, I have 2 players. I don't need this one anymore, so we'll clear that one away. And now I've just got my main node and no level underneath it. Any guesses what's going to happen when I run this? As soon as I run it, the player falls straight through. We have the same problem as I did previously. There is no collision. This tile map is just 2D images. There is no physical collision box here. Does that mean that I'm going to have to go back in here and create a collision object 2D for all of these squares? Well, thankfully not. What I can do instead is assign collision to my tiles. We head over to the tile set here to expand the options and go into physics layers. Under physics layers, I add a new element, and this now allows me to create collision on my individual tiles. I then make sure that I'm in the tile set tab down here, go into select, and then select the tiles that I want to add collision onto. So I used these 9 tiles, but I also used this orange one. So I hold shift and click to select that one too. Then I head over to physics, select physics layer 0. And in here, you notice that it highlights the square of the tile. So I need to add collision onto that entire square. Use these 3 dots here and reset to default tile shape. And you'll notice that it draws this red rectangle around it. So it's automatically created a collision shape for me. I can adjust this depending on the actual shape of the tile and the kind of collision that I want. But I don't need anything complicated. These are all just individual squares, and that's the collision that I need. Now that should be everything configured. If I run the game again, the player is now able to run around, jump, and stand on all of these different platforms, meaning that the collision is working perfectly. But one thing that's missing here is a background. It's just the default gray background of Godot. The asset pack from itch.io did include background as well, so I'm going to add a folder inside of my images called background. And there were loads of different designs in that asset pack, but the one that I like is this green one. So that's what I'm going to drag over into my background folder. Now that I have that, I need to apply it as a background. So I need to create a big rectangle to cover the entire game window. To do that, we go into my level root, add a child node, and we look for the texture rectangle, which is this one here, texture rect. I'm going to drag it up so that it is the second node above, and then I can grab the background image, drag it over to the texture, and it will assign it to the background. The problem is that it's really small, so it actually just takes up one individual tile. I need to resize this so that it fits the whole screen. So I go into layout, transform, and I set this to be my resolution, which is 1280 by 720. So now the background is green, but it's just that one tile stretched out, which is not really what I want. I prefer to have that individual image tiled, and there is an option for that. If I go into stretch mode, I can select tile, and now that background looks much better. However, there's one thing I forgot to do with the images. I did it with the player, but you notice the tiles are really blurry, and it's harder to notice that in the background, but that's blurry as well. So I need to select these images, go into texture, and I need to set the filter to nearest. More importantly, I need to do the same thing on my tile map. So we head down to texture, filter, nearest, and that immediately sharpens everything up. Now the game is looking much nicer than before. We've got a background and there's a playable level here. Now we can really start adding a lot more features to the game. We can start adding some enemies as well as items to collect. And I also need to actually do something about this exit so that when the player goes through it, he moves on to the next level rather than just disappearing off the screen. And I'll talk about all that in the next video. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Hit like if you found this video useful, and let me know in the comments if you have some more ideas for this game.